On May 26, 1990, Marlene Warren was having breakfast with her son, Joe Ahrens, when he says a clown approached their front door, carrying a basket of flowers and 2 balloons. Ahrens remembers his mother gleefully answering the door and accepting the apparent gifts, not expecting what she said at that moment. "How pretty," would be her final words. Within seconds, police say, the clown lifted a gun and shot Warren in the head, ending her life and starting a decades-long search for answers. Marlene Warren was someone without any known enemies, said Palm Beach County State Attorney Dave Ehrenberg. This was an assassination. This was not a random act of violence. Immediately after Marlene Warren's shooting, investigators tried to figure out who could possibly want the mother and small business owner dead. They soon focused on her husband, Michael Warren, who was also Aaron's stepfather. Aaron says, based on what his mother had told him, there was good reason. She said, "If anything does happen to me, your father did it," said Aaron's. "I told her no way. He would never do anything like that." She said, "Don't put it past him." Investigators learned about a possible motive. Michael Warren appeared to be having an affair with a colleague, Sheila Keene, who repossessed cars at the auto business he ran. In the hours after the murder of Marlene Warren, the suspects became clear, Ehrenberg said. It was Sheila Keene, and it was Michael Warren. But Michael Warren had an alibi. Authorities confirmed that Michael Warren was in a car with friends headed to a horse race at the time Marlene was shot, and he was ruled out as the shooter. When investigators spoke to Keene about her whereabouts, she claimed to be searching for cars to repossess, but was unable to verify her exact location. Detectives also learned a woman fitting Keene's general description was spotted buying a clown costume, as well as the balloons and flowers left by the clown before the murder. When detectives found a car fitting the description given by Ahrens of the assailant's getaway vehicle, they say they found a brown hair that was visually consistent with Keene's hair. Also found inside the car and in Keene's apartment were orange fibers investigators say matched the description of the wig the clown was wearing. Sheila Keene Warren had the means, the motive, and the opportunity to do this, said Ehrenberg. Despite the circumstantial case building against her, Ehrenberg, who did not become the Palm Beach County State Attorney until years later in 2012, says prosecutors at the time did not believe they had enough to charge Keene with Marlene Warren's murder. And as time passed with no new evidence, the case grew cold. For many years, I was suffering in despair, Ahrens said. By 2017, there was finally some movement in the case. A cold case unit had retested old evidence and determined Keene's DNA matched the hair found in the suspected getaway car. When investigators started looking for Keene, they learned she had started a new life with an old flame, Michael Warren. The couple got married in 2002, 12 years after the murder. Here's someone whose wife had been murdered and he just married the chief suspect, said Ehrenberg. When you combine the fact that the two of them were in an affair, and then later, they got married, it did seem like mission accomplished. The Warrens had been running a burger joint called Purple Cow for several years in Kingsport, Tennessee. According to former employees at the restaurant, there were rumors Keene Warren had shot Michael Warren's former wife, and that she had committed the crime dressed as a clown. Detectives spoke to one employee who said Keene Warren had dressed as a clown at the restaurant one year during Halloween, and even provided detectives with a picture of her appearing in clown makeup. Sheila Keene Warren was arrested for Marlene Warren's murder on September 26, 2017, 27 years after the shooting. She probably never thought in a million years she'd be held accountable for her crimes, says Ehrenberg about the arrest. She thought she got away with it. Keene Warren's defense attorney Greg Rosenfeld says not only is she not guilty, but her arrest was the result of the Palm Beach County State Attorney's Office's reckless desire to close a notorious cold case. We will never know who killed Marlene Warren because the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office and the State Attorney's Office did such a poor job investigating this case, said Rosenfeld. I can tell you without question that it was not Sheila Keene. Sheila Keene Warren, 59, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in a deal that will likely see her released from prison in no more than 2 years. Long suspected of being the shooter, Keene Warren has been jailed awaiting trial for first-degree murder since 2017, when Palm Beach County Sheriff's investigators said improvements in DNA technology proved that a hair found in the clown's getaway car came from her. Keene Warren has insisted, however, that she is not the killer. The deal calls for a 12-year sentence, but Keene Warren has already served 6 years awaiting trial. Also, Florida law in 1990 allowed significant time off for good behavior, so Rosenfeld expects her to be released early next year. Nearly 44 years after the stabbing death of an 18-year-old security guard in Sunnyvale, the cold case murder suspect has been identified. In 1979, Estella Elena Mena worked as a security guard in Sunnyvale for a business located at 444 DeGuine Drive, officials said. On October 27th of that year, Sunnyvale officers responded to a report of an assault at the business and located Mena in the lobby, suffering from multiple stab wounds. Deputy District Attorney Rob Baker said county investigators and Sunnyvale detectives used DNA from crime scene evidence that had been uploaded into a national database to conclusively identify Sam Silva of Colorado as the man who fatally stabbed Elena during a rape attempt at her place of work in 1979. Silva died in 2008 in a Colorado prison while serving a sentence on a gun charge. Baker said Silva likely had met Mena previously, when both worked at Great America. Silva and his victim were both 18 years old at the time of their deadly encounter. An office worker had interrupted the attack, causing the suspect to flee. Mena's killer remained unidentified until a new DNA analysis in 2023 by the Santa Clara County Crime Lab of blood on her shoes and clothing in the evidence file from 1979. The blood samples collected at the crime scene enabled the DA's cold case unit to crack the case. Baker said the Estella murder was one of the first cases the cold case unit looked into after District Attorney Jeff Rosen established it in 2011. Baker said that after crime scene investigators collected about 30 items at the scene of the 1979 crime, the only DNA we got was the victim and an unknown male from blood on the doorframe. The DNA from the blood samples were uploaded into the FBI's combined DNA index system CODIS in 2011 and used to create a profile of the suspect, but no match was found. The lab also collected various hairs, and in 2015, the hair samples were sent to the California Department of Justice. These also did not yield any positive identification, Baker said. Not getting any profiles from the evidence tested in 2011 is not surprising since analyzing mixtures and degraded samples was far more challenging back than it is today, the prosecutor said. Then, in 2022, investigators got a big break. The cold case unit used genealogy to identify the source of the doorframe blood and match it to blood on the victim's clothing. Once we identified the source, we used new technology to try and get a profile from the victim's clothing to see if it matched the doorframe guy, Baker said. Much of the victim's clothing was already tested in 2011, so in 2023, we sampled different items and parts that had not been previously tested, knowing that our instruments are more sensitive now. From this exam in 2023, our lab developed Silva's profile, which got a hit with CODIS. Baker said Silva had been staying with family members in Santa Clara County at the time of the killing and fled back to Colorado after the killing. Silva had a criminal history of manslaughter, attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, rape, and firearms offenses. Silva's DNA was collected and uploaded to the CODIS database in 2006, 2 years before his death. DNA technology was not sufficiently developed to identify him before he died. Since 2018, the DA's office cold case unit has solved 16 cold case homicides and 10 sexual assaults. 4 of those murders were solved with the use of forensic genealogy. Once we got the Cody's hit from the victim's clothing, Sunnyvale Public Safety Detective Matthew Hutchison went out to Colorado for several days to conduct follow-up interviews, Baker said. He's been doing traditional investigation, like interviewing witnesses, for several months, and it wasn't until September that Sunnyvale officially concluded Silva was the perpetrator. Investigators identified a 9-year-old girl's killer more than 50 years after she was abducted, less than a block from her Georgia home. 9-year-old Debbie Lynn Randall, 3rd grader, was walking home January 13, 1972, from a laundromat about a half-block away, when she was abducted, raped, and strangled to death. A near citywide search for Randall was initiated and included about 4,000 volunteers. A group of Southern Tech students found her remains 16 days later. Marietta police followed up on hundreds of leads without success. In October 2001, detectives sent a hair removed from Randall's body for DNA testing. The Cobb County Cold Case Unit received the case in 2015. In May of that year, a piece of clothing from Randall was sent for an updated test. Both pieces of evidence were then used to create a partial profile of a suspect. John and Juanita Randall died in recent years without ever knowing who kidnapped, raped, and strangled their daughter after she went across the street from their family's home north of Atlanta, Georgia, to run an errand in 1972. But authorities never stopped pursuing the truth about Debbie's slaying, and in September of this year, their community learned the identity of her killer. By all indications, it was a stranger who ultimately died by suicide, authorities announced, citing the results of an investigation that combined evidence collected shortly after Randall's death, as well as DNA technology. William Rose, who was related to people living in the same apartment complex as Randall's family, had not been a suspect in the case until the DNA technology linked him to Debbie's murder. Debbie's brother, Melvin Randall, stated, "It's a relief to my family that it was no one that we knew. And it's just great that it's over. Maybe we can rest about it and not worry about it, wondering who it was. It's weighed heavy on us for a long time." DNA testing carried out in 2019, made possible by extra funding, and a reanalysis of the cloth in 2022 brought investigators even closer to answers. Further DNA testing last year then brought investigators into touch with people who were probably related to the killer. Those relatives supplied DNA samples to assist authorities, and investigators said that evidence convinced them that Rose had murdered Debbie about 2 years before he died by his own hand at the age of 24. Exhuming Rose from his grave and running DNA testing on his body confirmed investigators' suspicions, Brody said. Ron Alter, a cold case investigator in Brody's office, told reporters that he did not believe Rose knew Debbie Lynn. Alter said what most likely happened was he saw her alone, perceived that to be a chance to abduct her, and acted on the opportunity. "I believe that was a crime of opportunity," Alter said. Alter also made sure to mention his suspicion that Rose, who had prior arrests for alcohol-related cases, killed himself out of fear that he would be imprisoned for Debbie Lynn's murder. Melvin recalled the guilt he carried for years because he was sick the day Rose kidnapped his sister, and he couldn't be at her side when she set out for the laundromat. He told the newspaper that he remembered knocking on neighbors' doors and posting flyers, desperately hoping either would help him and his family reunite with his sister, who loved playing baseball with him. The siblings' father died last year. Their mother died of leukemia in 2018. Despite the losses he has endured, and the painful circumstances around all of them, Melvin Randall said he was not angry with either Rose or his family. "I know they're struggling, going through this too," said Melvin Randall, now a grandfather. "It was tough for us, and I'm sure it's just as tough for them. I wish all of them well, and God bless them, and I don't have any animosity toward them. In the early morning hours of February 20th, 1987, Terry Wood came home from a night of bowling to discover his wife, Roxanne, dead on the kitchen floor in their home in Niles, Michigan. Detectives say Roxanne Wood had been sexually assaulted and her throat slashed. DNA was preserved from the crime scene, but given technological limitations of the time, there wasn't enough evidence to charge any suspects. The case went cold. Then, 34 years later, investigative genetic genealogist Gabriela Vargas got to work on what had been deemed unsolvable by many because of the scant amount of DNA that was left. Roxanne Wood took on a motherly role with her younger siblings, Brad and Janet. On the evening of February 19, 1987, Roxanne and Terry Wood met at home after work. The couple drove separate cars to a restaurant and had dinner together. Later, they went to a nearby bowling alley where investigators say Terry played in a league. The next day, Roxanne Wood headed home from a night out with friends about 45 minutes before her husband, Terry. When Terry got home, he found Roxanne dead on the kitchen floor. He called local police and said, "My wife has been murdered. She is dead. She has been cut." When investigators from the Michigan State Police arrived at the Wood home, they took photos of the scene, and Terry was questioned by police. Roxanne's body was examined for more evidence. Investigators at the scene found no evidence of forced entry, raising suspicion. According to investigators, Terry also seemed to get belligerent with first responders that night. And when Terry was brought to the station for routine questioning, he quickly asked for an attorney. This set off alarm bells for investigators. Janet Wood stated, an investigator told Terry while looking into Roxanne's murder, "I believe you're the killer, and I will not rest until you're behind bars." Janet Wood says she always knew Terry didn't kill her sister. She added, the possibility of her sister's killer still being out there. "I didn't lose hope ever. I mean, this guy just didn't do this and then lead a clean, pristine life the rest of his life." Due to limitations on technology in 1987, Roxanne Wood's murder case went cold. The Michigan State Police still had a tiny amount of the 1987 DNA evidence from Roxanne's case. In 2020, more than 30 years after Roxanne was killed, they started looking into new ways to solve the case with some innovation. In 2020, Professor Ashlyn Kirsten and students at Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, Michigan started helping the Michigan State Police with the Roxanne Wood case. The students digitized more than 3,500 pages from the 1987 case file, making it quicker and easier to search through evidence for information. The officers are able to search by name and see if they've already been interviewed, said student Samantha Rogers. Things that they wouldn't be able to do just flipping through thousands of pages. Detective First Lieutenant Chuck Christensen took the investigation a step further and reached out to genetic genealogist and president of Identifinders International, Colleen Fitzpatrick. Her company helps identify unidentified remains and people involved in violent crimes by looking at their DNA. In 2020, Identifinders International started looking into the unidentified DNA left from Roxanne's case. "We found out there was what I would call a gnat's eyebrow of DNA left, about 3% of what we normally use," said Colleen Fitzpatrick. "It really did feel impossible. After about 10 months of testing the small amount of DNA left to solve the Roxanne Wood case, Colleen Fitzpatrick discussed the case with Identifinders International consultant, Gabriela Vargas. After months without success, Fitzpatrick didn't want to disappoint investigators. Vargas looked at the case file and generated a genetic profile from the killer's trace DNA. She then entered the DNA information into an online database. In April 2021, Gabriela Vargas used the online DNA database to start building a family tree of the suspect. That family tree led to a man named Patrick Gilham, who was living in South Bend, Indiana, not far from where Roxanne Wood was killed. Investigators surveilled Gilham with the hope of collecting his DNA. While undercover, Trooper Ryan Codd noticed Gilham was a smoker and knew a cigarette would be a great source for a DNA sample. Trooper Codd picked up Gilham's cigarette after having a conversation with him outside of the laundromat. On July 29, 2021, investigators brought Patrick Gilham in and interviewed him. They told him he wasn't in trouble and that they needed to question him about an old case. Detectives showed Gilham photos of Roxanne and told him she was assaulted. They asked him questions about Roxanne, but Gilham denied knowing her. Soon he said, "I gotta talk to my lawyer, man," and investigators let him go. On February 17, 2022, Patrick Gilham, 67, was arrested and questioned for more than 5 hours. When asked why his DNA was found at the scene, he kept telling investigators, "I have no clue, and I don't remember." Gilham asked for an attorney at the end of interview. He pleaded no contest to second-degree murder, and on April 25, 2022, Gilham was sentenced to a minimum of 23 years in prison for the 1987 murder of Roxanne Wood. Detective John Moore said up until Gilham's arrest, Terry Wood was considered a person of interest. For 35 years, he labored under false assumptions that he murdered his wife. I'd heard stories that at times he'd walk into a place and somebody would call him Slash, said Detective Jason Bailey. Roxanne's brother, Brad Woods, was only 14 when his sister was murdered. He says he couldn't believe the day when they finally found the guy who killed his Rock. It didn't seem real. You know, it was nothing like I had ever played in my mind of how I would be when they came to the door to say, "We've got him." A man in 1987 was almost convicted for the murder of a 6-year-old boy in Solano County. Officials said DNA technology not only proved him innocent, but led investigators to crack the cold case 36 years later. Jeremy Stoner was kidnapped near his Vallejo home and found dead 4 days later on Sherman Island in Sacramento County. Sherman Island is about 36 miles east of Vallejo, along the Delta. An autopsy showed the boy was also sexually assaulted, the Solano County District Attorney's Office said. Investigators originally suspected Sean Melton in 1987, charging him with murder and kidnapping, because he appeared to have knowledge only the person responsible for the child's death would know. But his case was dismissed after a jury could not reach a verdict. It turns out those juries got it right. A different man, Fred Kane, 69, has now been charged with kidnapping and murdering Jeremy. It's unfortunate that Mr. Melton was tried for a crime he did not commit, Abrams said. The prosecutor said DNA technology that was not available decades ago has tied Kane to the killing. It's such an important tool because it can not only solve crimes, like we believe it solved this one, but it can also exonerate somebody who's innocent. But Melton, the original suspect, died in 2000 without being able to be here to know he's exonerated, Abrams said. It turns out Kane, the current suspect, was interviewed by police shortly after the kidnapping. But that same day, Melton, a self-styled investigator, walked into the Vallejo Police Department with theories about the case. He was either an investigator or private investigator, or a wannabe investigator, but he really wanted to help solve this case, Abrams said. But instead, Vallejo police quickly zeroed in on Melton. They lost their objectivity to fully investigate the case. They just became personally involved, said Peter Four, who was Melton's public defender and later became a judge. Fred Marion Kane, the man charged with murdering 6-year-old Jeremy Stoner in Vallejo, is now being investigated by police for a second cold case in Martinez. Kane, 69, was arrested on September 18th at his Gold Hill, Oregon home, and he remained in custody. 9-year-old Eric Coy was riding a bicycle around his Martinez neighborhood when he was kidnapped on January 24, 1987. His body was found the following day in a stream by Martinez Junior High School in Contra Costa County. Eric's killer stabbed him nearly a dozen times, according to investigators. The boys were kidnapped and slain within weeks of each other, and for 36 years, their killer's identity remained a chilling mystery. In September of this year, another major new development surfaced. Martinez Police Lieutenant Patrick Salamid stated that Kane is now considered a person of interest for Eric's death. Citing legal reasons, Salamid would not go as far calling Kane a suspect in the Eric Coy case. "It's nice that hard work pays off," said investigator Kevin Colho, a former Vallejo police officer. "We can't bring Jeremy back. Absolutely horrible what the family's gone through for the last 37 years. If you enjoyed the video, please show your support by subscribing and liking the video. And turn on all notifications so you don't miss any future uploads.